He stood in the center of the room, a king in his custom-tailored suit, holding his friends captive with a story. His voice, slick with expensive scotch and self-importance, carried across the marble floor. "Honestly," he said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes, "divorcing her was the best business decision I ever made. It was like cutting loose dead weight, an anchor of mediocrity." His friends chuckled along their eyes, scanning the opulent art gallery for his ex-wife, the subject of their ridicule. They were all waiting for the punchline. They just didn't know the punchline was about to walk through the door and obliterate his entire world. The Blackwood Gallery's annual charity gala was the apex of the New York City social calendar, a place where old money and new tech collided in a supernova of champagne bubbles and feigned smiles. Julian Croft belonged here. He moved through the crowd, not like a guest, but like a proprietor, his hand casually clapping the shoulders of tech billionaires and his smile flashing at the wives of senators. At 35, he had a jawline that seemed carved from granite, a portfolio that swelled with every market fluctuation, and a ruthlessness he disguised as ambition. Tonight, he was in his element, holding court near a towering abstract sculpture that cost more than a suburban home. His audience consisted of Mark, a hedge fund manager with a nervous twitch, and Mark's wife, Jessica, a woman whose face was a testament to the miracles of modern dermatology. "I'm telling you, Julian continued, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Amelia had zero drive. A pretty face, sure, but no killer instinct. In my world, if you're not moving forward, you're a liability." "But she was an artist, wasn't she?" Jessica offered, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "I remember her paintings. They were nice." Julian let out a short, sharp laugh. "Nice doesn't pay for a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Jessica. Nice is a hobby. I needed a partner, an asset, not a charity case who spent her days smearing paint on a canvas." The cruelty in his words was casual practiced. He had refined his narrative of their divorce over the past year until it was smooth and seamless. In his version, he was the magnanimous husband who had tried to elevate his simple small-town wife only to be dragged down by her lack of ambition. He was the victim who had finally broken free. "So, is she coming tonight?" Mark asked, his eyes darting toward the grand entrance. "I thought Blackwood was a fan of her early work." Julian's smile tightened. "Oh, I doubt it. This isn't her scene anymore. She probably couldn't afford a ticket for one. And secondly," he leaned in conspiratorially, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, "who would she even come with? Last I heard, she was selling charcoal sketches in a coffee shop in Brooklyn. It's tragic, really." He took a long, slow sip of his scotch, the very picture of condescending pity. He had built his new life on the ashes of their old one, and it was crucial that everyone saw him as the victor. The narrative had to be controlled. His success had to be juxtaposed against her failure. He had left her with almost nothing in the divorce, invoking a cleverly worded prenuptial agreement his lawyers had drafted. He got the penthouse, the art collection they'd acquired together, mostly with her eye and his money, and the freedom to craft the story. She got a small lump sum that would barely cover a year's rent in the city, and her own broken dreams. He felt a surge of satisfaction. He had won, utterly and completely. He looked towards the grand arched doorway, half hoping she would appear just so he could see the look on her face when she realized how far she had fallen and how high he had soared. He wanted a public confirmation of his triumph. Unbeknownst to him, the universe was about to grant his wish, but in a way, his carefully curated ego could never have anticipated. The doors of the Blackwood Gallery swung open, and for a moment, Amelia Vance felt like a ghost. She had once walked into rooms like this on Julian's arm, her dress carefully chosen by him, her opinions filtered through him, her presence merely an accessory to his. Tonight, she was here for herself. She wore a simple midnight blue velvet dress. It wasn't a designer gown dripping with this season's trends, but it hugged her form with an understated elegance that spoke of confidence rather than currency. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a loose chignon, a few errant curls framing a face that had regained a light Julian had spent years trying to extinguish. She wasn't here to mingle or be seen. She was here to see the new exhibit by her old mentor, Professor Albright, whose work was being honored. She had promised him she would be here, and Amelia always kept her promises. She clutched her small bag, her knuckles white. She knew Julian would be here. The thought had churned in her stomach all day, a cocktail of anxiety and dread. But avoiding him meant avoiding her own life, her own world, and she was done with that. She was rebuilding piece by piece, and part of that meant facing the ruins of her past without flinching. She moved along the periphery of the room, her artist's eye taking in the way the light hit a bronze sculpture, the subtle color palette of the paintings on the far wall. She felt a familiar pang, the ache of a passion she'd been forced to sideline. Julian had called her art a messy hobby, a cute distraction. He'd complained about the smell of turpentine and the cost of canvases, all while buying sterile mass-produced art as an investment. Suddenly, a familiar voice sliced through the din. Well, look what the cat dragged in." Amelia froze. Julian stood before her, his friends Mark and Jessica flanking him like well-dressed gargoyles. His smile was a predatory slash, his eyes raking over her simple dress with blatant disdain. "Amelia," he said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to turn their heads. "I have to say I'm surprised to see you here. Did you get lost on your way to a craft fair?" Mark snickered. Jessica offered a weak, uncomfortable smile. Amelia's face felt hot, the blood rushing to her cheeks. She straightened her spine. "Hello, Julian. I'm here to see Professor Albright's collection." "Ah, yes, the professor. Still clinging to those pipe dreams, are we?" He gestured around the room. "This is the big leagues, Mia. People here are buying art as assets, not as sentimental decorations for a dorm room." He turned to Mark. "She had this one painting, I remember, of a sunrise, so much orange. I think we used it as a coaster for a while before it mercifully disappeared." The lie was so bald-faced, so cruel it stole her breath. That painting had been her masterpiece, the one that had won her a fellowship. She'd given up because Julian was relocating for a major career opportunity. He had told her it had been damaged in a water leak in their storage unit. She felt the familiar shame wash over her, the feeling he had cultivated so expertly, the feeling of being small, untalented, and foolish. "Your dress is brave," Jessica chimed in, clearly, trying to fill the toxic silence, but only making it worse. Julian waved a dismissive hand. "Don't patronize her, Jessica. She's on a budget. We get it." He looked directly at Amelia, his voice dropping to a low, venomous hum. "Honestly, Mia, you shouldn't be here. You don't belong. You're out of your depth. You're alone, you look like you're about to cry, and frankly, it's embarrassing for both of us." He had her cornered. The whispers around them started to grow. People were watching the train wreck. Julian's public humiliation was a masterstroke of cruelty. He was cementing his narrative in real time, painting her as the pathetic ex-wife who couldn't let go. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run to disappear back into the safety of her small Brooklyn apartment. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but her throat was tight with unshed tears. And at that exact moment, the noise of the gala seemed to dip, as if someone had slowly turned down the volume on the entire city. A collective hush fell over the room. The conversations, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a reverent silence. The grand doors at the entrance had opened again, and standing there, framed by the archway, like a figure stepping out of a film, was a man everyone in the room, and indeed the world recognized. It was Ethan Thorne. Not just an actor, but the actor. the one with two Oscars, a reputation for being fiercely private, and a face that seemed to defy the very concept of aging. He was Hollywood royalty, but the kind that rarely attended such public events, making his presence all the more shocking. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored black suit, no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone. He radiated a quiet intensity that commanded more attention than Julian's boisterous peacocking ever could. The air crackled with unspoken questions. Flashbulbs from the paparazzi still lingering outside erupted in a frenzy. Who was he here with? Why was he at the Blackwood Gala? Julian, for his part, was momentarily stunned into silence. His jaw hung slightly agape. This was a level of celebrity that dwarfed everyone in the room. Julian instantly began calculating, his mind racing. An introduction to Ethan Thorne could open doors he'd only dreamed of. Ethan's eyes, a startling shade of blue, scanned the room. They passed over the mayor, the heiresses, the tech moguls. He ignored the gallery owner, Mr. Blackwood, who was already making a beeline towards him. His gaze moved with purpose, searching, and then it stopped. His eyes locked onto Amelia. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, a smile that transformed his intense features into something warm and incredibly chatouin. And then he started walking. He moved with an unhurried grace, a path miraculously clearing before him as people practically tripped over themselves to get out of his way. He walked past Julian, past Mark and Jessica without giving them so much as a glance. He walked directly to Amelia, who stood frozen, a deer in the headlights of an Aston Martin. He stopped an inch from her. The entire gala was now watching this silent, baffling play unfold. He reached out and gently took her hand. His voice, when he spoke, was low, meant only for her, but in the profound silence, it seemed to resonate through the hall. "Mia," he said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I'm so sorry I'm late. The traffic was brutal. Have you been waiting long?" Amelia could only shake her head, her mind a complete blank. Ethan leaned in closer, his gaze flicking for a split second to a tear that had escaped and was tracing a path down her cheek. He gently wiped it away with his thumb. "Hey," he whispered, his eyes full of concern. "Are you okay?" She found her voice a small, shaky thing. "I am now." He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze and then turned, positioning himself slightly in front of her, a subtle shield between her and the world, specifically between her and Julian. He finally acknowledged Julian, Mark, and Jessica, but his warm expression had vanished, replaced by a cool, polite indifference. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice level but with an unmistakable edge of dismissal. "My date and I were hoping to see the Albright collection. If you'll excuse us." He didn't wait for a response. Keeping Amelia's hand firmly in his, he guided her away, leaving Julian standing there, his face a comical mask of shock, fury, and utter bewilderment. The whispers that had been about Amelia's pitiful state moments before erupted into a firestorm of speculation. Who was she? How did she know Ethan Thorne? Julian watched them walk away, the superstar and his supposedly pathetic ex-wife, who now looked like the most enviable woman in the room. The scotch glass in his hand felt slick with sweat. The perfect narrative he had so carefully constructed had just been ripped to shreds in front of everyone who mattered. And the worst part, he had absolutely no idea how it had happened. As Ethan led her toward the quieter, less crowded wing of the gallery, where Professor Albright's work was displayed, Amelia felt as though she were floating through a dream. The judgmental stares that had pricked her skin moments ago had transformed into looks of awe and burning curiosity. She could feel Julian's glare like a physical weight on her back, but it was losing its power with every step she took away from him. "Thank you," she finally managed to say, her voice still trembling slightly. "You have no idea what your timing just did." Ethan stopped in front of a large, moody landscape by her old professor. He turned to her, his expression serious. I think I have some idea. I saw his face when I walked up. That man, he looks like he enjoys breaking beautiful things. His choice of words sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't say he looked like a jerk, or he seemed angry. He said, he looked like he enjoyed breaking beautiful things. It was a poet's observation, an artist's observation. It was the most astute summary of Julian Croft she had ever heard. How did we, she stammered, still trying to connect the dots of this impossible reality. Just then, a flustered but beaming Mr. Blackwood, the gallery's silver-haired owner, finally caught up to them. Mr. Thorne, what an absolute honor to have you here. I had no idea you were a collector. Ethan smiled politely, but kept his body angled toward Amelia. I appreciate art, Mr. Blackwood, but I'm mostly here with my friend. He gestured to Amelia. Mia, this is Arthur Blackwood. Arthur, this is Amelia Vance. Mr. Blackwood's eyes widened slightly. Vance, of course. You were one of Albright's most promising students years ago. I remember your work from the university showcase. Absolutely breathtaking. What have you been up to? Before Amelia could answer, Julian's voice would have echoed in her head, selling sketches in a coffee shop. But looking at Ethan, who was watching her with genuine expectation, she felt a flicker of her old self return. I'm finding my way back to it, she said honestly. Well, you must tell me how you two met. Blackwood said, his curiosity getting the better of him. The whole city is dying to know. Ethan looked at Amelia, a silent question in his eyes. She gave a tiny nod. It's not much of a Hollywood story. Ethan began, his voice drawing in a few nearby patrons who were pretending not to listen. A few months ago, I was scouting locations in Brooklyn for an upcoming film. It was one of those miserable, rainy New York days. I ducked into the first place I saw to get out of the downpour, a little coffee shop called The Daily Grind. He paused, a nostalgic smile playing on his lips. The coffee was terrible, to be honest, but on the wall there was this drawing. It was just charcoal on paper, but it stopped me in my tracks. It was a portrait of an old man sitting on a park bench feeding pigeons. But the way it was drawn, I could see his entire life in the lines on his face. The loneliness, the small joys, the defiance. It was the most honest thing I'd seen in years. It had a soul. Amelia felt her cheeks flush, remembering the drawing. She'd sketched it one afternoon in Washington Square Park. I asked the barista who the artist was. Ethan continued, his eyes finding Amelia's. She pointed to a woman sitting in the corner, sketching in a notebook, completely lost in her own world. She told me the artist's name was Mia. I bought the drawing on the spot, he said, turning back to Mr. Blackwood. And I asked the artist if she would have a coffee with me. A better coffee, at a different place, he grinned. We talked for 3 hours. About art, about life, about feeling like you've lost a piece of yourself and trying to find the courage to get it back. I went back to that coffee shop every week, Ethan admitted, and every week I'd buy another one of her pieces. My home in the Hollywood Hills is now decorated with the charcoal sketches of Amelia Vance, and I consider it the most valuable art I own. There was a stunned silence. Mr. Blackwood stared at Amelia with a newfound respect, his mind clearly reassessing her. She wasn't just a superstar's arm candy. She was the artist he was championing. The story wasn't about a celebrity saving a damsel in distress. It was about an artist discovering another artist, recognizing her raw, undeniable talent when she could barely recognize it in herself anymore. Amelia felt a profound sense of validation that was so much deeper than simple revenge. Julian had tried to humiliate her by mocking her art, and here was one of the most famous men in the world in front of the city's art elite, declaring that her messy hobby was the most valuable art he owned. The justice of it was exquisite. The story hung in the air, shifting the entire dynamic of the room. Amelia was no longer Julian Croft's pathetic ex-wife. She was Ethan Thorne's discovered artist. The whispers changed their tune from pity to intrigue. Who was this Amelia Vance? Where could they see her work? Julian had watched the scene unfold from a distance, his face darkening with every word of Ethan's story. This was a nightmare. He had orchestrated a public shaming, and it had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. His attempt to frame her as a failure had only served as the perfect dramatic setup for her triumphant reveal. He was no longer the star of the show. He was a footnote in a much more compelling story. Ego, however, is a resilient beast. Julian couldn't accept defeat. He saw Ethan's praise not as a testament to Amelia's talent, but as a personal affront, a challenge to his own judgment and status. He decided he had to reclaim control of the narrative. Pushing through the small crowd that had gathered, he approached Amelia and Ethan, a dangerously false smile plastered on his face. "What a charming little story," he boomed, trying to project an air of avuncular amusement. "Ethan, it's Julian Croft. It's a pleasure. I had no idea you were a fan of my ex-wife's little doodles." Ethan's polite facade dropped. His eyes became ice. He didn't extend a hand. "I'm a fan of great art, Mr. Croft. The size of the canvas or the price tag is irrelevant." Julian ignored the snub, placing a proprietary hand on Amelia's arm. She flinched and pulled away, but he pressed on his voice, dripping with condescension. "Isn't she something? I taught her everything she knows about the art world, of course. Tried to get her to think bigger, but she always preferred the quaint stuff." He was trying to reposition himself as her former mentor, the one who had shaped her. It was a desperate, transparent ploy. "That's funny," Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because from what Mia's told me, the only thing you taught her was to doubt herself. You taught her that her passion was worthless and her talent was an inconvenience." Julian's smile faltered. He was losing the room, and he knew it. He decided to double down on his cruelty, his last resort. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "She's always been overly sensitive. Can you believe," he said, turning to Mr. Blackwood, who was watching with a horrified fascination. "This woman used to be my wife. I spent a decade trying to give her the world, and she just wanted to sit in a room and make messes with charcoal. It's a little sad, isn't it?" Amelia felt a surge of white-hot fury, an anger so pure and potent, it burned away the last vestiges of her fear. For years she had swallowed his insults, absorbed his belittling remarks, and allowed him to shrink her world until it fit into the tiny box he'd designed for her. But she wasn't that person anymore. The woman who had sketched for hours in a coffee shop, pouring her soul onto paper, for no other reason than because she had to, was not weak. She had found her voice again, not just in her art, but in herself. "No, Julian," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through his tirade. "You know what's sad? What's sad is a man so insecure that he has to tear down everyone around him to feel tall. You didn't try to give me the world. You tried to take mine away from me." Julian was taken aback by her sudden defiance. He opened his mouth to retort, but Mr. Blackwood spoke first. "Ms. Vance," the gallery owner said, his tone now one of sincere professional interest. "Ethan mentioned your early work was quite different. More colour, larger canvases. I'd be very interested to see it, if any still exists." Julian let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Exists? Oh, you're not going to find any of that. I had to clear out all that clutter when she left. Most of it's probably ended up in a landfill in New Jersey. Good riddance, I say. It was a fire hazard." He was trying to land one final killing blow to declare her past her most ambitious work as literal garbage. But in his arrogance, he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had just handed Amelia the one weapon she needed to end the war. Julian's harsh, barking laugh was a discordant sound in the opulent gallery, a noise as coarse and out of place as gravel in a champagne flute. He was trying to project an air of finality, of ultimate judgment, as if he were an auctioneer bringing the gavel down on the final pathetic lot of Amelia's artistic ambitions. The small crowd that had been drawn in by the magnetic pull of celebrity and confrontation now watched him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. "Exists," he repeated, savouring the word, as if it were a fine vintage of cruelty. He gestured dismissively, with his scotch glass, the amber liquid, sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Oh, you're not going to find any of that. You have to understand," he said, addressing Mr. Blackwood, but intending his words for the entire audience. "When a marriage ends, you have to fumigate. You have to clear out all the remnants, all the clutter." Amelia felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This was his final act of erasure. He wasn't content to have diminished her in the present. He was now attempting to annihilate her past. Her early work, sums, Julian continued, warming to his theme. It was all so collegiate, so earnest. He practically spat the word. Enormous canvases, gallons of paint. She had this obsession with sunrises of all things. So much orange and yellow. Garish, really. It took up an entire storage unit downtown, costing me a fortune every month just to house these giant dust collectors. He took a theatrical sip of his drink, letting the moment hang in the air. "So when she left, I had a choice. Pay a team of movers thousands of dollars to transport all that stuff to wherever she was squatting in Brooklyn, or make a clean break. I made the executive decision. A team went in, broke down the frames, and hauled it all away. Most of it probably ended up in a landfill in New Jersey by lunchtime the next day. Good riddance, I say. Frankly, the sheer volume of oil paint was a fire hazard." He smiled, a tight, self-satisfied smirk. He believed he had landed the killing blow. He had declared her most ambitious work, the fruit of her most passionate years, as literal garbage. Something so worthless, it wasn't even worth preserving, so dangerous, it needed to be disposed of. He looked at her, expecting to see her shatter, to see the final flicker of defiance in her eyes die out. But Amelia didn't shatter. In that moment of supreme condescension, something within her solidified. The years of doubt he had so carefully cultivated fell away, replaced by a crystalline, chilling certainty. She thought of the painting, sunrise over the Hudson. She could feel the memory of its creation on her skin, the rough texture of the 7-foot canvas against her knuckles, the distinct, intoxicating smell of turpentine and linseed oil that clung to her clothes and hair for a year. She remembered the thrill of mixing the perfect shade of cadmium orange with titanium white to capture the hazy, ethereal glow of dawn breaking over the Palisades. She had poured her soul, her hope, her entire being onto that canvas. It was the physical manifestation of her talent, the thesis of her artistic life at that point. And he had just called it garbage. A strange, serene calmness settled over her. The frantic beating of her heart slowed to a steady, determined rhythm. She had him. He didn't know it yet, but in his desperate need to humiliate her, he had stumbled directly into the one perfectly laid trap she hadn't even known existed until this very second. "You're wrong, Julian," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the murmurs of the room with the precision of a scalpel. Every head turned towards her. Julian's smirk faltered, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "It didn't end up in a landfill," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Ethan, standing silently beside her, gave her hand a barely perceptible squeeze, a current of strength that flowed into her. He remained her silent witness, her anchor in the storm she was about to unleash. "You're talking about sunrise over the Hudson, aren't you?" she continued, her gaze locked on his, refusing to let him look away. "The big one. The one I worked on every single day for 14 months. The one that Professor Albright submitted on my behalf to the Florence Art Institute. The one that got me the offer for the 2-year residency, a full scholarship." She let that detail land, watching the memory register on the faces of Mr. Blackwood and a few others who knew of the prestigious award. And, she went on, her voice gaining strength with every word, it was the one you told me was destroyed in a freak leak in our building's storage facility. You were so convincing, Julian. You described the call from the facility manager. You told me the plumbers said it was a 1 in a million pipe burst that flooded the entire floor. It was, Julian insisted, his bravado starting to sound brittle. It was tragic. A complete disaster. The canvas was soaked, covered in mold and water damage. I saw the pictures. It was unsalvageable. The pictures, Amelia mused, tilting her head slightly. That's right. You told me the insurance company needed them for the claim, and that they were too graphic for me to see. You said you didn't want to break my heart all over again. How thoughtful of you. Her voice was laced with an irony so sharp it could draw blood. You handled the entire insurance claim yourself, didn't you? You said it was too complicated, too much paperwork for my artistic temperament. Julian's face had gone from confident to tense. I was trying to protect you. It was a painful time. Oh, it was painful. Amelia agreed, a cold fire igniting in her eyes. I mourned that painting like a living thing. I grieved for it. And I grieved for the future that was stolen from me. I turned down the Florence residency because the centerpiece of my portfolio, the very work that had earned me the spot, was gone. You held me while I cried, Julian. You told me I could always paint another one, knowing full well I was too broken to even try. The air in the gallery was thick with a terrible, riveting tension. The story had moved beyond a simple marital squabble. This was a tale of profound betrayal, a psychological drama unfolding in real time. It's funny you should mention a pipe burst, Amelia said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that forced everyone to lean in closer. Because just last month I saw a picture of that painting. Julian's face, which had been pale, now seemed to drain of all colour, leaving a sickly, waxy sheen under the gallery lights. He looked like a man watching a guillotine blade begin its descent. I was at the dentist's office, she said, the mundane detail making the revelation all the more devastating, flipping through a magazine to calm my nerves. It was a back issue of Architectural Digest, and there it was, a 12-page spread. A Titan's Miami retreat inside the seaside sanctuary of financier Robert Kessler. She saw a flash of recognition and panic in Julian's eyes. Kessler, a major client, a whale. And there, on page 6, was my painting. Amelia's voice was now a resonant bell of truth, clear and unwavering. My Sunrise over the Hudson. It was hanging in his living room, right above a massive white marble fireplace. It was the stunning centerpiece of the entire room. The light from the floor-to-ceiling windows hit it just so. It looked perfect, pristine. Not a drop of water damage on it, not a hint of mold. In fact, she added, delivering the final damning detail. The caption beneath the photo read, "A stunning contemporary landscape by an emerging artist acquired in 2016. She paused, letting the year sink in. 2016. The very same year you told me it had been destroyed. The very same year you lost a fortune on that bad biotech stock investment. You needed cash, Julian. You needed it fast. So you didn't throw my painting in a landfill. You sold it." The accusation, now fully formed and backed by irrefutable evidence, hung in the air like a death sentence. Julian was completely exposed, his character stripped bare for all to see. He wasn't the magnanimous ex-husband. He was a petty, deceitful thief. He was a liar, a fraud, a man who had not only stolen a piece of art, but had callously, cruelly stolen his wife's future to cover his own failures. That's a lie," he stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. "It's a ridiculous, hysterical accusation. She's delusional." He looked around wildly, seeking an ally, a friendly face, but found only a sea of cold, judgmental stares. Mark and Jessica had subtly shuffled several feet away, their faces masks of horror, as if trying to physically distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of his implosion. "Is it a lie?" Amelia challenged, her calm demeanor making his frantic denial seem all the more pathetic. Robert Kessler is a very public figure. I'm sure Mr. Blackwood here knows how to contact him. He's a prolific collector. We could call him right now on speakerphone. Ask him when, and more importantly, from whom he acquired the painting. I'm sure a man like that keeps meticulous records. Provenance is everything. Isn't that what you always used to say? Julian, this was the final checkmate. There was no escape. Mr. Blackwood, who had been watching with an expression of deepening disgust, now stepped forward, assuming the role of executioner. His face was grim. "Mr. Croft," he said, his voice resonating with the authority of a man who could make or break careers with a single phone call. "In my world, a person's word is the bedrock of their reputation. An artwork's history, its provenance, is its soul. What Ms. Vance is suggesting, it's not just a marital dispute. It's a fundamental betrayal of trust that speaks to a profound and disqualifying lack of character." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his sleek black smartphone. "And yes, I do have Mr. Kessler's private number. It will only take a moment." The sight of the phone in Blackwood's hand was Julian's breaking point. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a surge of pure animal panic. He was trapped, utterly and completely ruined. In this room where reputation was the only currency that truly mattered, he had just been declared bankrupt. He lunged forward, not at Amelia, but as if to snatch the phone from Blackwood's hand. He stopped himself just short, realizing the futility, the sheer indignity of the gesture. He looked at Amelia one last time, his eyes burning with a toxic mixture of pure hatred and abject shock. It was the look of a tyrant who had just watched a peasant lead a successful revolution. Then he turned and fled. He didn't walk. He didn't stride. He fled. He shouldered his way through the stunned crowd, his movements clumsy and graceless. He bumped into a passing waiter sending a tray of empty champagne flutes crashing to the marble floor. The sound of shattering glass was the perfect punctuation mark for his obliterated reputation. No one moved to help. They just watched as Julian Croft, the self-proclaimed king, the master of his universe, practically ran from the gallery. A disgraced coward, disappearing into the New York night, leaving behind the beautiful thing he had tried and failed to break. In the deafening silence that followed Julian's chaotic exit, the sound of the last falling shard of glass seemed to hang in the air, a crystalline punctuation mark on a decade of lies. For a single suspended moment, the entire gallery was a tableau of shock. The murmur of the city outside, the clink of ice in a distant glass, the very hum of the building's ventilation, all of it seemed to have ceased holding its breath in the vacuum Julian had left behind. Amelia stood at the epicenter of that silence, feeling the last waves of adrenaline recede from her body, leaving a profound, unnerving calm in their wake. Her legs felt strangely light, as if they might forget how to hold her up. A metallic taste, the residue of pure righteous fury, lingered on her tongue. She had done it. She had unfurled the tightly coiled scroll of her truth and read it aloud to the world. Ethan moved from beside her to stand partially in front of her, a subtle and instinctive gesture of protection. His broad shoulders shielded her from the full force of 100 pairs of staring eyes, creating a small pocket of privacy in the vast marble hall. He didn't offer platitudes or congratulations. He simply took both of her trembling hands in his own hands, warm and steady. The simple, solid contact was an anchor, pulling her back into her own body. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur, meant only for her. "Breathe, Mia. Just breathe. You did it." She took a deep, shuddering breath, the air feeling new in her lungs, clean and free of the cloying toxicity of Julian's presence. She had not just survived, she had prevailed. The spell that had held the room captive finally broke. The whispers began no longer the sharp, cruel hiss of gossip, but a low, rolling murmur of astonishment, and for the first time that night, respect. The narrative had not just been rewritten, It had been seized, torn to shreds, and resurrected under new authorship. She was no longer a footnote in Julian Croft's story. She was the headline of her own. Then a path began to clear through the crowd. It parted with the deference usually reserved for royalty or immense power, and through it walked a woman who embodied both in the New York art world. Amelia Vance, the famously formidable senior critic for the New York Times, approached. She was a vision in architectural silver, her hair a sharp modern bob, her eyes missing nothing. She bypassed Ethan as if he were a handsome statue, her entire focus landing on Amelia. She stopped and placed a surprisingly gentle, cool hand on Amelia's forearm. "What he did," Eleanor said, her voice a low, gravelly instrument that had eviscerated lesser artists for decades, "was a crime of the soul. Unforgivable." She paused, her gaze intense. "But what you just did, the courage it took to stand in your truth, unadorned and unapologetic, that was a work of art in itself. In a world of fakes, forgeries, and carefully constructed images, an act of pure, unvarnished truth is the rarest and most precious thing. I've seen 100 artists with talent, my dear. I've seen perhaps 10 with that kind of fire. The fire is what lasts. Don't you ever let anyone extinguish it again." Amelia, stunned by the endorsement, could only manage a choked, "Thank you." Nearby, Jessica Mark's wife hovered awkwardly, her face pale with a mixture of shock and vicarious shame. "Amelia," she stammered, wringing her hands, we had no idea. He always said, I'm so sorry." Amelia looked at the woman who less than an hour ago had patronizingly called her dress brave. She saw not an enemy, but a casualty of Julian's orbit, another person who had accepted his narrative without question. Amelia gave her a cool, distant nod. "Thank you, Jessica," she said, the words polite but clear. The conversation was over. That chapter was closed. It was then that Mr. Blackwood stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury and professional purpose. "Eleanor is right," he declared, his voice cutting through the remaining chatter. "Amelia, may I have a word with you and Mr. Thorne in my office? I believe we've provided enough of a public spectacle for one evening." He led them through a discreet door concealed behind a towering bronze sculpture, ushering them into a sanctuary of quiet elegance. His private office was lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with art history tomes and auction catalogues. Smaller, more personal paintings hung on the walls, works by artists he truly loved, not just those he sold. The sudden profound peace was a balm to Amelia's frayed nerves. Mr. Blackwood closed the heavy oak door, shutting out the last vestiges of the gala's noise, and gestured for them to sit on a plush, charcoal-grey leather sofa. He sat in a large armchair opposite them, his demeanor shifting from gallery owner to strategist. "Amelia," he began, his tone direct and serious. "First, an apology. Julian Croft has been a patron of this gallery for years. I pride myself on my judgment of character, and tonight I was shown to be a fool. I assure you, he will never be welcome in this establishment again." "I appreciate that," Amelia said, her voice regaining its strength. "But this is no longer about him," Blackwood asserted, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with a shrewd, focused light. "This is about you and about your art. What he did selling your painting under fraudulent pretenses, lying about its destruction to manipulate you both personally and professionally, is not just a moral outrage. It is almost certainly a jailable offense. It is fraud, clear and simple." He steepled his fingers. "My gallery retains one of the best arts law firms in the country, specializing in provenance and recovery. First thing tomorrow morning, we will begin proceedings. Our lawyers will file an injunction to prevent the sale or movement of Sunrise over the Hudson. We will contact Robert Kessler's counsel directly. It will be delicate, but the evidence, the magazine article, the date of publication, your direct testimony is overwhelmingly in your favor. The threat of a very public, very ugly scandal will likely make Mr. Kessler's team extremely cooperative. Men like him and Julian despise messes. We will get your painting back." The words washed over Amelia a wave of impossible hope. To see her painting again, her lost masterpiece, her stolen future, it was more than she had allowed herself to dream of. "But that," Mr. Blackwood said, his voice quickening with an electric excitement, "is only the beginning. An artist's story is part of their art. And your story, a lost masterpiece, a silenced artist who finds her voice and brings a titan to his knees. It is the stuff of legend. It's a narrative of resilience of an artist silenced and then reborn. It's magnificent." He leaned back, his eyes fixed on her. "The fall season begins in 4 months. I've just had an unexpected and now very convenient opening in my schedule for the headline exhibition. The spot is yours if you want it. A solo show. Amelia Vance Resurrection. We will build the entire exhibition around the recovery of sunrise. We'll contrast the raw monochrome honesty of your recent charcoal work with the explosive color of your past. We won't just display your art, Amelia. We will tell your story, and the entire world will listen." The offer hung in the air, immense and terrifying and beautiful. A solo show at the Blackwood. It was everything she had ever wanted. And a voice, Julian's voice, slithered into the back of her mind, a final desperate act of psychological warfare. "You can't do it. You're a one-hit wonder, Mia. That painting was a fluke. You don't have the discipline for a real show. You haven't picked up a brush in years. You'll choke. You'll fail. And everyone will see that I was right all along." She felt a wave of cold terror, the familiar fear of failure that he had so expertly conditioned in her. Her hands resting in her lap, clenched into fists. She could fail. He could be right. "He'll say you can't do it," Ethan said, his voice a calm, steady counterpoint to the venom in her head. He was watching her face, reading the conflict in her eyes. "He'll say anything he can to keep you small because your talent terrifies him and your strength eviscerates him. The only voice that matters right now, Mia, is yours. What do you say?" Amelia looked down at her own hands. She saw the faint, dark stains of charcoal etched into the cuticle stains that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. Julian had called them messy, but they weren't messy. They were the marks of a creator. They were the proof that even when he had taken her color, her confidence, and her masterpiece, he could not take the artist. The artist had survived. The artist had worked. The artist was still here. She looked up, and the fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cool, clear resolve. "I'll need a significant advance," she said, her voice not just steady, but resonant with a newfound authority. "Not just for supplies, but to cover 6 months of living expenses. I will not create my best work if I'm worried about next month's rent." She met Mr. Blackwood's gaze. "And I'll need a proper studio. Immediately. With north-facing light." She was no longer accepting a gift. She was negotiating as a professional. A slow, wide grin of pure delight spread across Mr. Blackwood's face. "Of course," he said, extending his hand. "Whatever you need. Welcome to the Blackwood Gallery, Miss Vance. We have a great deal of work to do." As she shook his firm, dry hand, the office door creaked open. Professor Albright stood there, his kind, wrinkled face a roadmap of concern. "Amelia, they told me you were in here." I heard the commotion. "Are you all right, my dear?" Seeing him, her first mentor, the man who had always nurtured her talent without an agenda, was the final emotional release. The tears she had held back all night finally came. Not tears of pain, but of overwhelming gratitude. She crossed the room, and he enveloped her in a hug that smelled of pipe tobacco and turpentine, the foundational sense of her artistic life. "All right," he chuckled, pulling back to hold her by the shoulders, his old eyes shining with pride. "My dear girl, you are formidable. I always knew the artist in you was a lion. That man just tried to convince you that you were a kitten." He beamed at her. Now tell me about this new work, the charcoal pieces Ethan has described to me. He says they have a soul. What have you been exploring in the darkness? Amelia. I thought I'd lost my colour, Professor. She explained the words coming easily now. So I focused on the lines. On form, on shadow, on the truth you see when you strip everything else away. I wasn't exploring darkness. I was just learning to see in it. They talked for a while longer, making plans before Amelia and Ethan finally prepared to leave. As they walked back out into the main gallery, the crowd had thinned to only a few stragglers. The atmosphere was quiet, reverent. Those who remained watched her pass, their expressions changed. They nodded, respectfully. They saw her. Stepping out of the climate-controlled gallery and into the warm, humid embrace of the August night felt like being born. The city air, thick with the smells of roasted nuts and exhaust fumes, had never felt so clean. The cacophony of sirens and distant music had never sounded so much like a symphony. The city was no longer Julian's playground. It was her canvas. A taxi glided to the curb, and Ethan opened the door. As she slid inside, he followed the cab, pulling away into the river of traffic. "The first time I saw you," Ethan said, his voice soft in the relative quiet of the cab. "In that coffee shop, you had this look on your face when you were sketching. It was the same look you had tonight when you confronted him. Fierce, focused, like the rest of the world didn't exist. That's the artist, Mia. That's who you've always been." "Thank you, Ethan," she said, turning to him, her heart filled with a gratitude so immense it felt like a physical presence. "Not for saving me, but for seeing me. When I was starting to forget what I looked like, you saw me." The cab reached a crossroads, the light turning red. The driver grunted. "Where to, folks?" One direction led towards the bridge to Brooklyn, to her small apartment to sleep to tomorrow. The other led deeper into the sleepless heart of Manhattan. Amelia knew that a choice was a beginning. Her new life couldn't wait for morning. It didn't need a formal studio or a signed contract. It needed a single decisive act of creation. She leaned forward. "Take us to the 24-hour art supply store on 13th Street, she said, her voice ringing with a joyful, unshakable purpose. She leaned back against the seat, a genuine, brilliant smile lighting up her face. In her mind's eye, she was already there. She could smell the sharp, clean scent of gesso and paper, could feel the satisfying weight of a new tube of oil paint in her hand. She could see the rows upon rows of colors, a glorious, infinite spectrum of possibility. Cadmium orange, phthalo blue, alizarin crimson. She had been living in a world of charcoal and shadow, but she had never forgotten the language of light. "I have a new sunrise to paint," she whispered, as much to herself as to Ethan. And as the cab made the turn, plunging into the glittering electric heart of the city that was now hers, she knew with every fiber of her being that this was the dawn. Amelia's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful reminder that your worth is not determined by someone else's opinion. Julian tried to write her story for her to cast her as a failure in his grand narrative of success. But he forgot one crucial detail: she was the artist. She held the pen, the charcoal, the brush. She had the power to create her own reality, to paint her own masterpiece. Her triumph wasn't in arriving with a superstar on her arm, but in finding the strength to speak her truth and reclaim her own talent. The superstar was just the spotlight that finally allowed the world to see the brilliance that was there all along. What did you think of Amelia's incredible journey back to herself? Have you ever had a moment where you had to stand up and reclaim your own story? Let us know in the comments below. If you were inspired by Mia's strength and refusal to be silenced, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner power, and make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Thank you for listening.